Here is a bit of information about me before I discuss my story. I enjoy ghost hunting, and here in Montana there are plenty of places to do it. I'm somewhat sensitive to the other side. I see and hear things, but usually I keep it to myself. A select few know of my gift, mostly my friends. Now, here's my story. The date was October 31st, 2007. I went on a ghost hunt with my college roommates to an old unused hospital. It was a couple hours drive from our dorm. One roommate was named Damon, the other named Justin. Damon was very excited and decided to bring along his Ouija board. It was made in the mid-1900s. He had gotten it a few years before as a present from his stepfather. I don't use Ouija boards at all. I believe them to be evil. The hospital was quite big, so we split up. I, being the brave one, went alone to the north part, and the other two went to the south part. We didn't have any equipment because we were poor college kids. Though I did bring a notepad and pen so I could write down anything that happened. While I was exploring, the two guys decided to break out the Ouija board. They had used it in the past and had gotten strong responses from it. They immediately got a response when they started using it, a figure 8. It did that for some time before saying its name was Jo, the female version. They spoke to her and asked her to move objects or make noises. Finally, they got her to tip a flashlight over, so they grew bolder. They asked her to show herself. She bluntly said no. They started to insult the being. They said she was weak. Eventually she gave in, but she warned that they would regret it if they saw her. Damon told Jo to show herself to me. Jo answered with more figure 8s along the board. The planchette then moved to goodbye. While all this was going on, I had no idea what I was about to see. I entered a small 30 by 30 room. I asked if there was anybody with me in the room and if they would make themselves known to me. My flashlight went dead right after I said this. In the corner of the room, I saw a white figure. It was contorted backwards with an arching back and it was on all fours. It was completely bald. I could see that it was female as it had no clothes on. It took everything I had in me not to run screaming. I reminded myself that some ghost hunters go their whole lives without seeing a full-body apparition. This was no opportunity to pass up. The figure made no noise or movements. It just stayed in its contorted position. I got within 10 feet of it. I was horrified and could not move any closer. To this day, I remember exactly what it looked like. Slowly, it turned its bald head to look at me. As I looked straight into the figure's pure black eyes, it grinned. I felt like a rabbit being watched by a wolf. It was then that my courage failed me, and I ran yelling for Damon and Justin. We left at once. I didn't speak at all. I was too scared. My friends knew me to be brave, so anything that scared me enough to shut me up for a 2-hour drive was a force to be reckoned with. When we got back to our dorm, we recounted our evening. From what I understand, once the Ouija conversation was over, the being showed itself to me. I don't know if it was a ghost or a demon. It looked real, like I could have touched it, but it was unearthly. I wasn't using any drugs or alcohol. I have had regular checkups, and besides being a little pudgy, I am in good physical and mental condition. There is a series of abandoned mental health facilities close to where I live in upstate New York. I have snuck into, photographed, and explored the majority of them, with the exception of the more modern buildings that are sealed off with metal bars and chains. One building in particular still gives me occasional nightmares to this day. The building is 3 stories and is of brick construction. It has fallen victim to time and Mother Nature. The floors are rotten and the roof is partially collapsed. The building is more or less a death trap if you aren't careful, which brings me to the first of 2 stories that I'm sharing today. One early evening in June of 2009, my friend and I were headed up the road leading to the buildings. We passed a group of college kids, which was a fairly common occurrence considering there's a community college relatively close by. We were a bit irritated by this, and we hoped there would be no one inside to disturb our photo shoot. We entered the building and all seemed quiet, so we began unpacking our equipment. After setting up our artificial lighting and snapping a few test photographs of our setting, we heard some muffled laughter and talking from somewhere in the building. We brushed it off as nothing and assumed that there were indeed some college kids in the building. We hoped that they would not disturb us. A few minutes later, we heard a loud crash followed by a girl screaming. I immediately assumed the worst and said, "Oh fuck, I think someone fell through the floor." I have first aid training and have worked search and rescue before. After a quick assessment of the situation, my friend and I set off into the building together. We kept waiting to hear the rest of the people and wondered why the hell no one was helping this girl who was crying out from somewhere in the building. The basement revealed nothing and the first floor was empty. We searched the second floor, occasionally shouting to the girl that we were going to help her and to stay calm. We kicked down a few rotten wooden doors, pulled back old bed curtains, and checked every nook and cranny, and then came to a huge hole in the ceiling. We assumed that it was the acoustics of the building that made the girl constantly seem like she was right around the corner from us, and that the sound was traveling through the hole and echoing through the halls. We went upstairs and searched all the rooms until we came to one door that was closed. After trying to nudge it open, it seemed to be jammed. The girl sounded as if she was right behind it. Remembering my training, I decided it was time to break the door down. I yelled through the door to the girl and told her to try to move away from it if she was anywhere near it because we were going to knock it down. Several kicks did not open the door, so my friend and I decided to get a bit of a running start and ram it down together. The whole time, my friend kept saying, "This doesn't make sense." I assumed he was as confused as I was about why the door wouldn't break. After getting a running start, I threw my weight onto the door, which, to my surprise, broke out of the frame like a twig. Whatever instinct my friend had during those few seconds may have saved my life. As I hit the door, my friend yelled, "Wait!" and grabbed onto the collar of my shirt. Right as he did this, the door flew out several feet and fell 3 stories. It hit the ground with a loud bang. I scrambled away from the ledge with my friend in a total state of shock. The only thing behind that door was the collapsed wing of the building. There was no girl and no more shouting. Nothing besides the sound of my heart beating in my ears. I learned why my friend was saying it didn't make sense. He was thinking of the layout of the building and was certain that behind that door was the collapsed part of the building. Had he not grabbed me, I would have fallen with the door 3 stories onto a pile of rubble. After listening and chatting for a few more minutes, my friend and I quickly left the building, having decided there were no people inside other than ourselves. My second story involves the same building. One afternoon in mid-July, my friend and I were back in the building taking photos. It was daylight and considerably less frightening with so much sunlight coming through the broken windows. We were on the 3rd floor when we heard what sounded like someone slamming a door, followed by heavy footsteps and a considerable amount of noise. We immediately assumed that it was one of the security guards trying to scare us out of hiding. We snuck down to the 2nd floor and tried to figure out a way past them and out of the building, which only has one entrance that is not blocked off. As we were about to turn a corner into a hallway, we heard footsteps coming from that direction. We turned into the nearest room and hid in a closet. The closet only had half a broken door and about a 3-foot blind spot if someone were to look at it from the room. We pressed ourselves flat against the wall and hoped no one would stick their head in the closet and see us. The footsteps grew closer and soon entered the room we were hiding in. They crossed the room, stopped, and we heard the metal bed frame creaking as if someone had sat down on it. We stayed as still as possible for nearly 30 minutes when finally we heard the footsteps leave the room, head down the hallway, and down the stairs. We quickly rushed over to the room above the entrance to look out of the window and see when the security guard left, but no one ever left the building. We waited for 2 or 3 hours. As it started to get dark, we decided to chance ourselves getting arrested and leave the building. We walked downstairs, took a quick look around, and left the building the way we came in, completely confused and uneasy about the situation. So this is something that happened to me today between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. My partner works 12-hour shifts 5 days a week, so he doesn't usually get to see our children during the week. He has a week's holiday at the moment, so he decided to take our 2 sons out to the park and then for ice cream. Around 9:45, I texted him and asked if he had his keys because I wanted to go for a walk. He said he did, so off I went. We live in a small town called Asylum on the coast of northeast England. Now, most people in England haven't heard of Asylum as it's so small. So as a general indication of where it is, it's on the outskirts of Sunderland. Before Maggie Thatcher became Prime Minister, Asylum was a thriving mining town. Back in the 1800s, a serial killer named Mary Ann Cotton lived here for a while. She has been rumored to have murdered at least 4 husbands, 2 lovers, her mother, a friend, 5 of her stepchildren, and at least 11 of her own children. She is said to have poisoned them all with arsenic and collected life insurance on them. She is somewhat of a local legend around here, and there are several nursery rhymes about her. The reason I mention Mary Ann is because there is one local urban legend about her. The legend says that Mary Ann had one daughter who survived. She was supposed to have been born while Marianne was awaiting trial and was given to a cousin of Marianne's here in Siam. Marianne's daughter was supposedly thrown in a mental asylum at age 18. Some say that when she learned about what her mother did, she went mad. Others say she was born evil. The legend goes on to say that she died at age 27 in childbirth at the asylum and still haunts the building. Of course, it's just a legend. She may never have even been in an asylum at all. Around 10 a.m., I left the house and decided to walk up to the small woodland near my home. I have walked and driven by the woodland thousands of times, but have never actually walked through it, so that's what I decided to do. I walked maybe a mile and a half through the trees and came out at the edge of a farmer's field. I could see a farmhouse at one end of the field and didn't want to intrude, so I turned left and walked towards more trees. As I got closer to the trees, I could see a sign. I walked up to it, and as I got around the corner, I saw a building a quarter of a mile behind the sign. I realized I'd found the old hospital. I knew it was up that way, but it had closed long before I was even born, so I'd never had any reason to be up there. I'm a very curious person. Honestly, if I was in a horror movie, I'd be first to die. I'm the one who investigates strange noises instead of locking doors and calling police. So, of course, I decided to have a look around the hospital. I looked around outside for a while and saw nothing out of the ordinary, just overgrown grass and brambles. I had a look in a window, and it was just an empty old room, very dirty and in great disrepair. I carried on looking for maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I even tried a door to see if I could get inside, but it was locked, so I decided to leave. I was halfway down the road towards the sign when I had a curious feeling that I should look back. I turned back and found my eyes drawn to an upstairs window. For a split second, I saw a shadow cross the window. At first, I thought that maybe a bird was in there and I had just seen the shadow of it flapping about the room. I started to look at the other upstairs windows and they all just looked dark. A couple were boarded over and I couldn't see anything. I was just about to continue my journey home when I looked back to the first window. I saw a young woman with her hand on the window looking down at me. I immediately felt a great sense of sadness, and after a few minutes she disappeared. I walked back towards the trees, wondering if I had imagined seeing her or if it was a trick of my mind. I still had a really sad feeling. As I walked out of the trees back at the farmer's field, I saw a man walking his dog. He could see that I was distressed and he asked if I was okay. I said, "Yes, I'm fine. I just thought I saw something a little odd by the hospital." He immediately said, "Oh, you saw the gray lady." I was a little stunned at that, but I continued to listen. He told me that his family had lived in that farmhouse for generations and that his grandmother and some great aunts had worked as nurses and cleaners in the hospital. He told me that he often saw a young woman in an upstairs window or in the hospital garden. Sometimes from his house you could see her wandering around by the edge of his field. He then told me a story that his grandmother had told him. A young girl's aunt had sent her to the hospital because she thought she was mad. Before she was sent off to an asylum, his grandmother, a nurse, had taken a liking to the girl and sort of acted like a mother figure to her. A few years after she was sent to the asylum, she died, and his grandmother said that she had started to see the girl's ghost in her old room and other various places. He said the family referred to her as Mavis, but he isn't sure if that's her real name. I was walking home and I began to think of the legend of Marianne's daughter. Although I had never believed the legend, it made a bit of sense. I told my partner about what I had seen, but he was skeptical. He said I could have just seen a trick of the light or an old curtain that had blown in a draft. I suppose he could be right, but I believe my eyes, and I saw a woman. I feel very privileged to have been able to see Mavis, and though I felt a great sadness, I didn't feel threatened. It felt more like a feeling of loneliness and a sense of being lost. I intend to go back up to see her as often as I can. Maybe I'll be lucky enough to see her again.